This is Hawk Podcast 1515, and we are live in Dallas, and I am David Liggett with Data Center Hawk, along with the one and only Mike Netzer. Mike,
I have literally rolled up my sleeves. We're doing so much work here, so tracking the data center market.
That's right, we are. So we are back from a holiday weekend, and yeah, it was a good weekend. Did you have a good weekend?
I had a great weekend. I took on a larger than normal house project. I built a wall in my garage.
Home improvement project.
Bro, let me tell you what, I enjoy what I do for a living, and I do not want to be in the business of building houses. So it was fun. Right. It was a hard challenge, but it was good. Best
tool you got to use?
I borrowed my neighbor's air compressor nail gun. That's what it was. This thing, y'all know what I'm talking about.
It's always fun.
How about you? What'd you do?
A lot of family time. Watch some college football. The college football season has started. I think the last podcast we did, we were right on the verge of it. But now we are a weekend in, so I spent the $4.99 charge and subscribed to ESPN Plus, which was the only place that the Baylor who did we play? Stephen F. Austin game.
The Lumberjacks?
The Lumberjacks, yes. Okay. And so I guess that was the only place that would broadcast that game.
And how'd it go?
Baylor was victorious, so it was good. But it was, the no offense to Stephen F. Austin, but, smaller school. So
sure. What was the final score? I'm curious.
Like
I didn't look at it.
In the 56-17.
Okay.
Hold on. It's going in my left ear.
Yeah. So I've got I went to the University of Idaho.
Yes.
Go Vandals.
Talk to us about the Idaho football
Well,
team.
we're 1AA now, so it's been a little bit of a rough decade or two.
Were they 1AA when you were there?
No, we were at Division One.
Step back.
Yeah. It was the right move, but we play, bigger schools at the beginning of the season to get a little paycheck.
Yeah.
Penn State. I don't know what the over/under was, but we definitely went under, and they definitely went over. It was 79-7. So that's a rough. It's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah. Well.
Anyways,
it's but we're here. It's a fun time of year, and football, has started. So excited. We as if you're just joining the podcast for the first time, we talk about data center industry topics that are changing the space today, and this is certainly a dynamic space. What we're going to talk about is really interesting because the actual content today, because some of it is fresh, but some of it kind of goes back to when we started Data Center Hawk and some different thoughts we had around data center consultants in the space, which I'm excited about. But if you're just new, you can find us on all social platforms. We video certain components of this as well, so you can see our beautiful faces. But yeah, really excited about this morning. We've got some fun things to talk about. Mike, what is on tap for Hawk Podcast number 15?
Okay, so we're in part 3 of 4 on our little mini series we've done this fall on challenges faced by different folks in the industry. Week 1 was the end user. Week 2 was the operator. This week 3 is the broker/consultant, which again is the world you came out of. So
that's right.
Something you can speak on
That's
with
right.
great authority. You can wax philosophical about the broker role.
Sure.
Next week is going to be the investor, so stay tuned for that.
Yes.
All right, so we've got an over-under. We've got some role play. We've rebranded our hyperscale segment called Hyperscale Hustle.
Oh, let's go.
So I know that you love to hustle and you love to tell people to hustle. So that should be a great segment. So before we jump in, I've got a fun little data center nugget for you.
Okay.
All right.
Data center nuggets.
As you may know, a lot of data centers are repurposed older buildings.
I do know this.
Especially in the Northeast, we see more of that. So
yeah.
Fun fact about the building on 85 10th Avenue, New York.
Okay.
A building Google recently bought, but it's got a data center in it. So this building, some fun history on this building. Back in 1898, it was occupied by a group of baking companies that combined to form the National Biscuit Company. Do you know what that company became? It's called now? Nabisco, you got it.
Okay,
and in 1912,
the
very first Oreo cookie was produced there.
In that building?
Oh which is now a data center. So some fun history.
Amazing.
So
I had no idea.
I know, near and dear to my heart, your heart, my
Oreos.
wife's heart for sure. Oreos,
yes.
So let me ask you a couple questions on Oreos. Are you a purist or are you a double stuffed guy?
I think I'd classify myself as a purist.
Okay.
Oreo purist.
Regular
what are
Oreo.
you?
I'm a double stuffed guy.
Interesting.
Yeah. I like the cream.
And will you actually dip the Oreo in milk?
Yes, I will, which leads me to the next point.
Oh.
Special over-under. The over-under for number of seconds you should dunk an Oreo is 6.5.
Oh, I'm definitely under.
You're an under?
Yeah.
You like some
I'm
crunch?
Yeah, I mean, and even, so this would even, yes.
Okay.
I think there's like, you don't want to soak that thing. I mean, it takes the true integrity of the...
Okay, the structural integrity of the Oreo.
Out of it.
Fish nothing out with a spoon.
Yes, but I will say this kind of goes back into, a discussion about how you eat cereal too, and like how long your expectation of the the cereal that you eat, and do you like it soggy? Do you, how much milk do you want on the cereal? Sure. So gosh, you get so much of these.
So you're
podcasts.
Under on 6.5. I'm over.
Interesting.
I'm a 10-seconder. Count to 10. So, anyways, you put it in count 10. It should barely come out.
Interesting.
Yeah.
God, we're so different. Glass, 10 seconds.
Yeah, 10 second hold.
2. I mean, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Interesting. Gosh, I'm learning so much
so,
about you.
Fun fact about the data center industry.
Come on.
A lot of fun, colorful history on some of these buildings.
Yeah.
All
Love
right.
it.
So let's do that. Let's jump in. Let's talk about, some of the challenges faced by the broker /
Yes.
consultant in the industry. How do they solve them?
Yep.
In that unique perspective.
Yeah, and it's one of the things I love getting to do with our podcast is talk about not just the challenges but also some of the solutions. And as Mike mentioned, I mean we've done this the last 2 podcasts where we're actually talking about real world, real time challenges that different professionals in the data center industry are having. So he mentioned in the first one, we talked about the data center user themselves, companies that are acquiring IT infrastructure, challenges that are there. The second one we talked about was data center operators, companies that own and operate data center facilities and provide services to end users, and some of the challenges that they're experiencing today. Today, we are going to focus on data center consultants. And, this consultant is a very loose term. But what I really want to focus on today is not only consulting companies that are helping data center users with their IT infrastructure decisions, but those that are helping strategically think about what to do with real estate assets, those that are strategically thinking about what to do with IT, like application assets, either on the raised floor or just the strategy behind that process and figuring out what to do with what. These are 7, what I'm calling 7 truths for the data center consultant. So I want to identify, a challenge in that, but I also want to talk pretty candidly to a group that I think is, has significant value in the space. And one of the things that we said back in Hawk Podcast 13, your first podcast, which I'm sure is our most viewed and watched one, but is one of the things I said was around the data center user, and that most of the people that participate in infrastructure IT strategic decisions typically only do that a couple times during their career, because there's they make the strategic decision and then they go execute it, and then they're a part of that decision for a long time, and then they do it again after a while. The consultant world is in this world every day. This is what they do. So they bring to the table the right consultants. Obviously, when you can, maybe there's some that wouldn't bring this value, but most of them are going to bring the value of working with a wide variety of different companies. So they're going to be able to help you see what other companies have done and the value that's there. And actually, some of this content that we're going to share today, so again, the 7 truths for the data center consultant, some of this was taken from something that I wrote kind of right when I started Data Center Hawk. And that was really with the goal of, hey, where's the market today and what's happening? And I think the encouraging thing is that a lot of these things are still true today. And so they're great things to focus on. So let's dive in. 7 truths for the data center consultant. The first truth is it's early. And what I mean by that is we're still in a very young, dynamic industry. Technology efficiency continues to improve. Data consumption by companies and consumers is growing so large it's almost hard to quantify. You've probably heard, like in the industry, and I know you've heard this, where they say we're basically doubling the amount of data that we're creating on every 2 years. And so this is just like exponentially going to different places. And so with that comes all these different opportunities and challenges. And so this is something like we are still in a very early part of this business.
Yeah, and contrast that with like the office or industrial
Sure.
or retail market that are maybe more mature and established. So, not to say that those consultants add any less value, but the approaches are a little bit more mature.
Yeah. So if I think about this from a commercial real estate perspective, so if you're a commercial real estate consultant in this business, we are still, I remember when I started in the space, 12 years ago, it was the wild, wild west of helping companies. And so what you've seen is a maturity of consulting offering to companies where they're not just helping with like what we're doing with real estate assets, but they're actually like strategically thinking through how you can efficiently use your IT infrastructure over a long period of time. And so I just say it's still behind those more mature commercial real estate markets, the office, the industrial, the retail side of things. And so there's just a lot of ground to be gained. It's one of the reasons I scratch my head at why there aren't more younger professionals joining this organization. I mean, it's one of the things, like if you're listening and you go to a data center conference, one of the things that a number of these organizations have talked about over the last, I'd say 2 or 3 years is like, how do we grow this industry from a younger professional perspective and a more diverse perspective? And it's going to be a problem. But I would tell younger professionals getting in, it's a dynamic industry. It's not going anywhere for anytime soon. It just takes a commitment. If you think about from a real estate perspective, if you think about traditional real estate, learning the data center component of that is just more technical. It just takes a little bit longer, but it's not rocket science. And if I've offended you listening, like, no offense, but it's not. It's just different components, but it all works to, if you're a consultant, all of it comes together. Your mindset should be to go help the companies itself. So I just think with the significant amount of data pointing to growth in the industry, the emerging technologies that are coming, we talk about autonomous cars, we talk about AI. There's just so much, and then other stuff we're unaware of. This is just it's early in the space, and I don't see it going away anytime soon. So that'd be the first thing I'd say is it's early. Number 2, the data center market is always changing, and I think as a consultant, you can never afford to stop learning, and serving a company with excellence requires an academic commitment. You have to, and this really points to the difference between, am I going to do the important things or am I going to do the urgent things? So this is a business principle, but at some point you have to get out of the day-to-day and look at the macro and go, I've got to continue my ability to learn so that I can help continue to lead companies to where they need to go. And if you just think about the hybrid approach that we talk about with companies that they're taking today, and that's a mixture of either co-location and cloud solutions from a data center perspective, or it might be public cloud and private cloud and how those work together. It could be there's a wide variety of things companies are doing today with their infrastructure, but that's a really specific example of you have to be, as a consultant, you have to be able to speak to those things, or you will not sit at the table with those companies to help them. And so you just got to keep up with the changes in the market, and it just takes a commitment. Number 3 is, and this is a hard truth, but companies don't think they need you. And so this is one of the things that, especially in the commercial real estate world, is, a lot of companies aren't even aware that the commercial real estate community can serve the real estate IT infrastructure needs of a company. And they don't even know. And so the companies aren't even aware that you could be helpful to them in the process. And the biggest proof of that is how many transactions in the market are like unrepresented by a consultant. And these are like very strategic initiatives that companies are just unaware that, that service exists. Your biggest competition sometimes is your own client and convincing them that you add value. So the truth, that your ability to save data center users time and money, through the negotiation process adds a ton of value, but a lot of companies don't know that you can do that.
And, we talked about, I think it was here last week or the week before, somewhat from the end user standpoint of there almost being I won't call it role ambiguity, but
Sure.
if you're looking at a process from the outside, and even sometimes internally, the IT manager doesn't know who else has got a vested interest in the project. And if you're a consultant coming in looking at it from the outside, being able to discern who's got the final say, who's the decision maker,
Yep.
something we talk about a lot, but then, how to keep everyone else happy and
Yeah.
say like, how to propose or construct a solution that meets everybody's needs.
Yeah.
You're talking about the financial, talking about the real
Yes.
estate, talking about the IT, talking
Yeah.
about whatever else may be
Yeah.
involved. So
Yeah, and
just learning how to assess those situations.
Yeah, and if you're a good consultant, you want that. I mean, your best moment, in my opinion, is when, and it has nothing to do with money, but your best moment is when you get to the end of the project. The right people have been involved. The right solution was, the company chose the right solution, and you help guide them along the way. I mean, that's when you can look, I think, at yourself in the mirror and say, hey, I'm good at what I do. And that takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of knowing how to work with different people within organizations. I mean, you bring up that great point. If you're talking, you can't talk to a group that is focused on IT the same way that you talk to a group that's focused on procurement or the financial group within a company. I mean, you have to be able to tailor your message to help them understand what you do. But the reality is that, like, some companies believe they know the process better than you, and it's your job to convince them that that's not right. You know that process, and you can go execute. The fourth truth for the data center consultant today is that quality market data is scarce. And so your ability to obtain and provide quality market data is a must as a consultant. It's what you're going to use to help benchmark the decision-making process. And one of the biggest challenging is like decoding and communicating that information to the end user themselves. And and in our space, there's so many acronyms. There's so many changes in technology. There's so many things that are happening consistently that it can be hard to keep up with. It's one of the reasons we created our site, Data Center Hawk, is to help people in the market keep up with the market that are actually going out and serving clients too, because you can't do it all. It's really hard to do both sides of that really well. And you have to understand, I think as a consultant, you have to understand what's the greatest value of my time and where can I spend that time most efficiently and effectively. And then where can I, invest in other areas that are going to help me put my time towards the most revenue generating, opportunities. But the users expect the consultant to have data that can really help them make the right decision. And so it's hard to get. Data in our market is hard to get. And that creates a problem with the fifth truth, which is clients expect market data very quickly. And that's just the world we live in today. But if someone comes to you with a need, you're on the clock. You got to get him the right info, and you got to get it to him quickly. And, data center market data market information is challenging to get. A slow return of information to a client can create doubt in someone's ability to perform the due diligence required for confident, data-driven business decisions. And so that's why I think, going back to what I said before, like partnering with those companies that can help you get that information quickly and get it to the people that need it is really important. And you want to do that before the need is there. If you're making those phone calls trying to figure out how to get the information when it happens, from my perspective, that's poor planning. You're going to need the market info. So how can you set yourself up to get it to your client as quickly as you can when they need it? So number 6 is you're most valuable when you answer the why of the situation. So on our last podcast, we quoted Mike Tyson. On this podcast, we're going to quote Albert Einstein.
We're widely varied in our interests here.
Going to the other end of the spectrum.
Both philosophers in their own right.
That's right. Yes. But Albert Einstein said, any fool can know, the point is to understand. Mm-hmm. And the true value with helping people is really understanding what's going on behind what they need, and then to help them get to where they're going based off of, why they're wanting to go there. And so you don't just want to be an order taker. And that's part of the challenge with our business today, from the consulting side, is a lot of companies that are asking for the help, the people that are asking can sometimes feel like they know the answers better than those helping them. So, there's got to be some maybe humility involved on both sides to understand that, hey, I'm going to bring in some people that know what they're doing when you think about the end user themselves. But, for a data center consultant, understanding the impact of how cloud is changing the way companies think today, the buy versus build discussion. We're seeing a lot of consultants get involved on the sale leaseback transactions that are there today. The benefits of co-location, those are all conversations that are coming your way, and you got to be thinking about that from the company's perspective, and you need to be ready.
Yeah, and it reminds me of another proverb. It's called "Faithful are the wounds of a friend."
Yeah,
and so someone who is willing to challenge you
Yes.
and say, maybe even I think you're wrong in this specific approach. But like you said, doing it in a way that's humble. And if you've hired somebody and all they do is agree with you, if two people in business agree, one's redundant.
Yep.
You heard that proverb.
Yep.
So just being willing to say, hey, being educated to where you can make that recommendation, and maybe that's different than what they had initially requested.
Yeah, and that's good. I mean, I think a lot of consultants can feel that's a hard place to be. You got to deliver a message that might not be very popular, but it is. It's good for companies to hear that. You just got to do it in the right way at the right time. But I think I would say most companies would value that more than they would, not want you to tell them the truth. So especially with this, because it's so capital intensive and your business depends on it. So that's a really important part of it. But yeah, you're most valuable when you can answer, the why of a situation. Okay. And the seventh truth for the data center consultant is technology advances will change the industry. Nothing will replace your ability to guide a client through the process, but you should anticipate how you serve clients and that will change over time. And I think it's someone's ability to learn and take advantage of the technology changes that will put you ahead and keep you there. I mean, you always have, in our space especially, you always have to be looking forward because things are going to change. And you've got to an extent, be ready to deal with the change because of decisions you've made, several months ago, several years ago to position yourself to do that. So, because the technology advances will change the industry, you got to change with it. And those are just 7 quick truths for those that are in the space. I highly, at least from my perspective, I came out of this world, but there are people that are doing this and they're doing it extremely well. And I commend them. It's a very challenging position to be in because of all these things. But in the same, from the same, approach, they provide a ton of value. They can really help companies make really good decisions that set them up not just for this year to succeed, but also for the future. And that's one of the reasons I think a lot of companies miss it. If you're an end user and you're listening to this, a lot of companies miss because they just plan for today's problem. They're not looking at the problems 5 to 10 years. And you have to have both a macro and a micro strategy, in my opinion, that you are trying to solve for. And the micro or today's needs and the macro is what needs could come down the road. And these consultants that are out there today, the right ones, they can help you figure out what those are.
Awesome. So 7 truths. Thank you, David. And the truth shall set you free. Is that right?
Gosh,
as usual, we'll put this in a blog and we'll link it in the show notes. So you have that in just a concise way. So good stuff there. All right. We've got a data center over-under today. So this is one where, we look at one of the metrics we track is like the vacancy in a market.
Yep.
So how much available space is a percentage of the total market size, right?
Yep.
And if you look across North America, you see, some cities like Seattle is north of 20% vacancy, and you see, Northern Virginia, as you might expect, the low end of that, just under 4%. So that range, right? There's some economic factors that come into play where, too much vacancy is going to drive the price down, and operators aren't going to like that. Too little vacancy is going to drive the price up, and the end users won't like that. So just from a market health standpoint, think about like what's the ideal vacancy rate for a market. I'm going to set the over-under as 8.5%.
Yes. So I would say 8 to 12% is my healthy area. So, probably over that, but we have the data center market's really interesting from a vacancy perspective because, we're looking at commission power. That's how we're measuring it. And how much of that commission power is sitting on the market available. And so that's one really important thing to note. If you're listening, our vacancy rates are tied to that, not tied to how much power could be built at a 100 megawatt campus or whatever that is. But I think that 8 to 12%, is where you want to be. There's some office markets from a commercial real estate side that would love to be in the 8% range. That would be really healthy. But from my standpoint, if you look across where, if you think about the top 10 markets that we look at, Atlanta, Chicago, Dallas, LA, New York, Northern Virginia, Northern California, Northern New Jersey, Phoenix, and Seattle, we're kind of in that 10% range, and I think that's healthy. I mean, Northern Virginia is somewhat of an anomaly because it's so big, yet the vacancy rate is so low because of a lot of the big deals that have been done over the last several years. But I'd say 8 to 12% is healthy.
Okay. All right, we're going to talk a little bit of role play here.
Yes.
All right, so you are the Chief Executive Officer, CEO of a large data center operator. And there's been a lot of consolidation in the industry, more so in past years than in this year. So it's now September.
Yep.
And you got 4 months left of the year. You're an operator, so you're thinking, there's been consolidation in the past. Is this now the time to either look to A, acquire, or B, be acquired?
Mm-hmm.
And how are you making that analysis? How are you doing that analysis and saying when is the right time to potentially make a strategic move in the industry?
Yeah. That's a great question. And it's one I'm sure there's some leaders in companies that are trying to figure out today. One caveat I'd say is each company has its specific set of criteria that they would probably walk through as they're thinking about that decision. And each company has made decisions specifically to them that would, make this a good or a bad time to be evaluating that. So with that being said, I think companies are looking at market dynamics. We're in a somewhat of a stable economic period right now that at times can feel very unstable. So that's one thing I think probably companies are looking at. The data center industry certainly is at a very visible place today than it was compared to where it was 3 or 4 years ago, and it's performing quite well. So I think all those things are what companies look at, and I think they also look at the decisions that buyers are making. Are they making the same decisions that they might have made in the last year, 3 years, 5 years? And so those would be, some of the things that I think, leaders are looking at when they're evaluating the market. I think they're looking from a global perspective. This is a global business, as we've talked about, and I think they're looking at the U.S. compared to Europe, compared to Asia, and how these different trends are impacting where they're located. All those things I think would be worth evaluating if you're trying to understand, what those decisions are. So whether it's the right time or wrong time depends on the company.
Sure.
But I certainly think it wouldn't surprise me by the end of 2019 if we see some increased M&A activity in the space.
Okay. And not to put you on the spot as far as specific companies, but from a company on company type of analysis, does it make sense like a US based company picking up a European company doing some merger there, or is it, what's some of those geographical drivers? Yeah,
no, I think that's good. I think there's, the quickest way into a market, and I say quickest, but, from a customer and capacity standpoint, obviously is acquiring other companies. So if you feel like the market from a global perspective is growing into that type of a business and you're not located in a certain country, then obviously the quickest path to entry there, and again, when I say quickest, this might be a 12 to 18-month process, whatever that is, can be acquiring another company. And so I certainly think that is a route larger companies are looking at taking from a growth standpoint. And, I think that'll lead to, as I mentioned before, some of that M&A activity that takes place, before the end of the year.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you, CEO David.
My pleasure.
Which is currently the hat you wear at Data Center Hawk, so not a big change there. All right, so now you are a regional, call it a bank IT manager, company who we've seen, frequently have infrastructure needs,
Sure,
coming to look for space, et cetera.
Yep.
So, and again, shameless plug here, we've got a tool on our site to help them do that.
Sure.
And solicit bids from, providers in their area, and we hope to be helpful in that way. But, on the back end of that, now you've gotten 5, 6, 7, 8 quotes in the door, for a couple of cabinets of space, connectivity, et cetera. And we've seen very wide variance on how those quotes are organized.
Yeah.
what's on them. Some literally have one setup fee and one monthly charge, and just everything's bundled. Others break them out, and say maybe there's a price plus a discount times a quantity, and it can be very confusing. So, if you're looking at these, you've got a paper or a desk full of these, or a desktop full of these, and you say, hey, well, are these prices negotiable? Can I counter on some of these things?
Yep.
Can I work directly with a fiber provider? So what's what's kind of like your best practice? You've got these. What do you do with them?
Yeah, that's good. While the industry is where it is today, it's actually improved a lot since, I think I started back in the mid 2000s. There's a couple of things that I'd focus on if I was that company. I mean, one would be, how do I make sure that my requirements are clearly laid out on the front end? One of the challenges I think a lot of people get themselves into is they just don't know how to assess their front end needs. And we talked about this on the Data Center User podcast we did several episodes ago. But it's like you've got to know on the front end what those are. That will help you get the information back. And I think requesting the information back in a specific manner will help get those topics back to an apples to apples comparison. That's just really important. So that'd be the one thing I would say. There's the second would be, I think it's really important to understand, and that can help us from a financial perspective, the company, the compliance side of things and some of the extra things that they need to make sure that they get to a solution at the end of the day that matches what they need. But, the providers, I think, need to do a better job. I don't think they've gotten better, but of helping the user really understand what they have. Everybody wants to be different, but there's part of this that's like at its basic rate is, it's rent, it's power, space, cooling, and then the data center operator has a number of other solutions that help them differentiate, from one company to another. And so they obviously want to be showing that. I think that the data center user just needs to be aware that you're going to get numbers and you need to be able to understand the differences between those numbers because it is very confusing. And the last thing that you want to do is, I think companies will go out and they'll get 5 or 6 different approaches to a problem, and they realize how complex each one is. And so then they take 1 or 2 that they think are, potentially the current solution. And one of those typically is the cheapest, and another one might be in that range. And then the complexity of the decision, sometimes they'll just kind of push away because they might not have time. It might involve people that just at the end of the day, it's not going to prove to be a fruitful exercise. And so, in my opinion, that sometimes can lead to companies not taking the right solution just because they didn't walk through the process effectively. The last thing I would just say on this is just because it's the least expensive option does not mean it's the right one. And companies have got to get that through their head, because if you save whatever percent, 10% on the front end of that, but you spend 30% to make it right on the back end, it's just not worth it. Plus the pain of going through that process, figuring out, hey, we went through this whole experience, this whole evaluation, and we got it wrong. That's just a hard place for a company to be. So I just, once again, the least expensive option is not always the best one.
Sure. And I think, what we've seen is, some of these smaller deals, they don't necessarily warrant or someone to come in from a consultant standpoint. So the key would be to educate yourself.
Yep.
Do some research on the front, and we help to provide, a lot of that information on our site.
Sure.
Just to be able to say, hey, what are even the right questions to ask before you go into that? So,
Yep.
All right. You can put back on your Data Center Hawk CEO hat now for our hyperscale hustle.
I can't wait. Let's go.
We're calling it the hustle now. So, all right. So, we talked the other day, I think not on the podcast, just you and I, about how, there's these big buyers in the market.
Yep.
Right. And somewhere of neighborhood of like 50 to 75 individual deals or, leases in the market account for something like 60% of all absorption in North America. So big buyers. All right. So with that in mind, I've got a new vocab term for you, David. The vocab term, yes, I know you're a vocab guy. The new term is called oligopsony. And we're going to need Rhett to put that in the footnotes. Anyways, so what it describes is, a marketplace in which there's just a handful of large buyers.
Sure.
And they kind of influence the market. Maybe even unduly influence.
Okay.
And we can't have undue influence now, can we?
We can't.
So, one example of that is like, fast food chains.
Okay.
They drive like the meat market. They're just huge buyers of beef and chicken, et cetera. Another example is tobacco. I think there's like 3 companies that buy like 90% of all U.S. grown tobacco. So those are just a couple examples. So and we kind of see that in the data center market with a couple of really big buyers who really kind of, I wouldn't say they dictate, but they certainly influence the market.
Sure.
So, so talk a little about that. Is that healthy? Is that going to change?
Yeah.
How is the market responding to that reality?
Yeah. That's a great question, and I always like new words to be shared on our podcast. So I think that's
impress your friends.
Yeah, oligopsony. Gosh,
it's a good one.
Can't wait to use that at dinner tonight with our kids. I'm sure they'll know exactly what that is. So I'm going to actually answer that on both sides because I think I could argue both sides of this on why it's certainly healthy for the market and why it could be unhealthy. So on the healthy side, number one, the data center industry is in a place today that, if you had told me where it would be like 5 years ago, I would have told you that that's not going to happen. What some of these large requirements have done is really change the way that the industry is operated in a good way. It's created massive opportunities in not just the U.S., but markets across the world as these companies look to set up their cloud infrastructure. So one, significant value to the market, and it's driven this industry to places that not a lot of us, I think, would have predicted 4 or 5 years ago. Number two, it's created a lot of efficiencies with the way data centers are being designed today. And so I think that's been another really interesting part, and I think that's a healthy part. There was a lot of overbuilt data center facilities, in the last probably 10 years. And so I think there's some reconciling of that's taking place in the market today. But just overall now, people are really thinking through, we want a much more efficient facility. It's driven a ton of conversations around renewable energy. And, if we're 2% of the data center industry is 2% of the world's electricity usage, I think those conversations are great. And companies not just are having the conversation, but they're actually making decisions to the best of their ability around how to, I'm speaking of these large companies, around how to, use that energy as they build out these global portfolios of data center facilities. So that's on the healthy side. There's been, more healthy things happen than unhealthy. On the other side, it certainly can be, these if the needs of these larger companies are negatively impacting maybe some opportunities for smaller companies, but that still have legit, requirements, that could be a challenge, But even in that, I see that you could argue that there's been a number of smaller data center operators that have been able to help companies with these different requirements, these smaller requirements, because the bigger requirements are keeping the attention of some of the larger providers, But, it's definitely driven pricing down, but it's a different product, and it's, these are massive opportunities. So if you think about that, that's traditionally how, big buyers work, right? They have the leverage to push prices down and create competition between one provider and the other. So they're working hard to not only build, but also win these requirements that can change the market. So, I could argue both sides, but I certainly think that, I think that these companies are going to continue to grow. So it'll be fun to watch how it impacts the market. From our perspective, it's taken the market to new heights, and we, like I said, we're unbiased. So whether the U.S. grows at a certain rate, or Europe grows at a certain rate, or Chicago, or Dallas, or Phoenix, for us, it doesn't matter. We just want to help tell the best story we can and help educate people in the market on why things are happening the way they are. But oligopsonies are just certainly interesting. And
they're fascinating.
I'm glad we were able to talk about one today.
Great insight as always, David. So that's Hyperscale Hustle. We need to get kind of maybe some funk music to play in the background as we queue up this segment.
That's right.
We're just going to try and make it more fun. Anyways, so great stuff, David. All right, so that's the pod.
Yes.
For today. Anything in closing, David?
No, I think, again, from my perspective, the 7 truths that we talked about for the consultant, I mean, in my opinion, that's some of the greatest value we can give. These are truths that I think will last a long time, and so just evaluating where you you or your company are in that process, I think it's really important and can really, provide an opportunity to go, hey, how can we grow here? And how can we maybe have some hard conversations that'll push us to new opportunities in the space. The data center industry is growing. It's not going anywhere. And if you're a consultant in the space, there are opportunities everywhere. You just got to open your eyes, and you got to continue to educate yourself to see what those are and be able to have the conversation at the table with the user.
Awesome.
So anyway, this has been Hawk Podcast 15. You can watch it on YouTube. You can listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud. There's one more. Spotify, that's right. So it's a number of places. We are not offended if it's times where you're doing something else and you're looking to fill your ears with some exciting, encouraging, data center industry talk. So anyway, thanks for listening, and I hope to catch you on the next one.